right, let's discuss this now with political analyst Sanet Madonsela. Sanet, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. So John Steenhuisen has officially launched his re-election campaign. But before we get to that address to members of the party today, just take us through your views of his tenure at the helm since Mmusi Maimane's departure. How has he fared?
Thanks so much for having me. I think that it has been more of a 50-50. I think that after the sudden departure of Mr. Maimane, there was obviously a vacuum in terms of the leadership. Over the years, there have been a lot of infighting in terms of the political party. And I think that this role was particularly challenging. In terms of the governance of the party in the cities that they've managed to do quite well. I think it was a 50-50.
And then to today's address, he was the first to say his vision for the Democratic Alliance is quite ambitious. He went on to say that he wants to bring the ANC below 50%. This was part of his 7 pledges. Some say that is probably possible, but through no effort of any opposition party. It will probably be the ANC itself. Your views?
I don't think that this would be owed to any political party. I think that the ANC has been scoring a lot of own goals. I think that they have done quite poorly in terms of governance. I think that the current electricity crisis has just thrown people over the edge. And I think that should they perform less than 50%, it wouldn't be because there are other political parties, but I think it would be due to their mismanagement, their poor governance, and their lack of leadership.
So that pledge is not so ambitious. It's a strong possibility, at least according to you. Let's go then to his assessment of the political climate to be post the elections. He says the nation will be faced with a binary choice between a yellow coalition led by the ANC or a blue coalition led by the Democratic Alliance. Your take on those predictions post the 2024 elections?
I think that there's a strong likelihood that the people may have to choose between the DA and the ANC, but I also wouldn't count the EFF out just yet. As a smaller political party, they have managed to grow immensely over the past 10 years. They have managed to grow to an extent that most people didn't think that they would. So I think that there's a possibility that they may also be serious contenders. But I think that should the DA have a majority in terms or have a stronger hold in terms of the outcome from the 2024 elections, I think there's a strong possibility that they would have to go into a coalition with the EFF and smaller parties. So I think that either the ANC or the DA would have to pair with the EFF, which would put them in a stronger position.
And where would you place the fairly new participants, that's BOSA, Mmusi Maimane's political party, and Action SA, which has been doing very well insofar as local government, particularly in Gauteng, where many had not expected?
I think that BOSA has a good chance of at least getting 1 or 2 municipalities. I don't think that they would be the overall winners of the election. I think that would be more between either the EFF, the ANC, or the DA. I think those would be the ones that might come out with the majority. I think that the smaller parties are doing quite well. And I think in terms of South African politics, over time, I would say at least in the next 10 to 15 years, we would see something in terms of political parties having to merge. We will see that coalition politics would become the norm. I don't think that we would ever go to a one-state-led system ever again.
And then he also pledged to end load shedding. Your views on just that pledge? Should we be looking to how they've managed load shedding in the Western Cape? Perhaps that should give us an idea of maybe this pledge being met?
I think that the electricity crisis is quite extensive, and I think that it would take more than one political party to resolve it. I do think that should the DA win the national elections, they would have to do quite a bit of work to undo everything that was done over the past few years. I think that the maintenance and just the building and stuff would take more than 5 years. So even if they were to be in power, I think that restoring Eskom in its current capacity would take a lot of work. But I do think that any political party should be able or would be able to resolve the electricity crisis by opening up the grid to other electricity providers, because I don't think that solar electricity is too far off. There are areas in which wind electricity, like for example, in the Eastern Cape would work quite well. So I think it's just a matter of decentralizing, as Steenhuisen said, and allowing those different provinces to make electricity plans in terms of what would work for them. Like the Northern Cape might be better off with solar, whereas the Eastern Cape might be better off with wind turbines and so on. So I think it's like you won't have a one-size-fits-all approach, but I think that it can be fixed. The question is just whether there is the political will to do so.
All right. So you're for the devolving of more powers into the provinces. But on Derrida, he was quizzed by a journalist around the perception that the Democratic Alliance defends him. He did state that insofar as his obligations were concerned at the beginning of his term, he didn't meet any of them. We still have load shedding. It has in fact gotten worse. But he went on to say that it's immaterial who the person at the helm is, quite frankly, according to him. The whole system is a problem, and anybody that is brought in to stabilize Eskom will basically fail. Your views on that?
I think that there are a lot of dysfunctionalities in terms of the SOE that would require anyone taking up that position to actually come up with a completely new idea. Some of these power stations have been, they were built years and years ago. I believe some were built in 1967, and there hasn't really been a lot of maintenance and upkeep and so on. So I think that, I think that the Andre de Ruyters could have done a bit more. But secondly, I do think that Eskom is just in an absolute crisis, if we can say so. And I do think that there were multiple warnings since the 90s in terms of needing to upgrade the infrastructure, needing to build new capacity or add more capacity in terms of the grid and so on. So I think a lot of work needs to be done. The Ruyters could have done more, but he also has shared why it was not possible given the challenges at the power utility.
Another pledge that was quite topical is that of focusing DA communication around issues that matter most to voters. Now, the privatization conversation becomes a very controversial one in South Africa. We know our history. You've got our labor movement that are quite scared or very apprehensive to see government move towards privatization. It's that big P. So when a DA wants to appeal to South Africans, do you think the messaging around privatization or giving the private sector a bigger role to play in the country, do you think such a message would resonate with South Africans currently?
I don't think that it would resonate with a lot of South Africans, because while the current ruling party isn't doing that well in terms of just governing the country as a whole, I think that people are quite skeptical in terms of the power that the private sector would have in such an instance, because you don't know who it's going to be sold to, and you don't know how it's going to impact on the larger or broader community. So I think that if you want to structure your messaging, I would focus on things such as service delivery, which is a very big problem. I would focus in terms of improved healthcare, improving the quality of education. Those are things that people want, like the political parties, to commit to, dealing with issues of unemployment and so on. So I don't think that privatization is something that is quite pressing. I do think that there are more urgent matters that need to be addressed before we can have those kind of conversations.
Because there are those political parties who come from that ideology that if you create an enabling environment for the private sector, they will fulfill a greater role in society. But then there are those of the persuasion that, listen, they are essentially for profit. And at any given point, if the opportunity comes for them to mechanize, they will do so. They will remove human capital and put in machines. Where do you stand on just that debate?
I think this one is quite complex. I wouldn't urge the immediate privatization of a lot of the country's SOEs and so on. I think it would be a mistake. I do think people are right in believing that the private sector's role is to make a profit, because at the end of the day it is. We see a lot of instances where things are automated and so on, and with the advancements made in terms of artificial intelligence, it's just a matter of time before your smaller tasks or your tasks that don't require people to have a post-school education, like before those are automated. So what I would suggest is maybe just holding off on terms of that. I do think that there should be other alternatives that can be looked into. I would definitely urge maybe working with the labor unions. I would urge maybe employing more people who have the necessary skill sets to improve how those SOEs and government institutions are operated and so on before having conversations about privatization, because I do think that at the end of the day, should privatization go wrong, it would be the most fragile people in society would be most affected.
So do you think John Steenhuisen stands a chance of being re-elected, given as well that we've seen the entry of Dr. Mpho Phalatse into that race?
I think it'd be awesome to have a female leader in terms of South Africa, but I do think that John Steenhuisen has a strong chance of being re-elected, given the fact that he has 5 out of the 9 provincial or provinces support. I think that Dr. Phalatse would have to do more in terms of like just getting more support or generating more support. I do think that she hasn't really started her campaign. And I also think that the past in terms of all of her removal from office and so on in the votes of no confidence actually count against her. So I think that we need to, or she needs to rather, structure her message beyond having the female being in the leadership position, or beyond it being a person of color being in like in terms of the leader of the Democratic Alliance, and actually structuring a message in terms of what she can achieve. Because I do think that South Africans are past the phase where they actually care about personalities. I think we just want people who would be able to keep the lights on, people who would ensure that you can take a jog in the morning, people who'd be able to make sure that people can actually make use of the public health care, the public education system, and so on. I think that's what South Africans actually need. And if she can tailor make her manifesto and so on in terms of that, then I think she has a stronger chance of winning. But I do think that she needs to work on strengthening her support base in the DA, because she hasn't been in politics as long as Steenhuisen. I believe Steenhuisen joined in 97. So he has quite a strong constituency in terms of the Democratic Alliance. So I would say if she doesn't win this one, I would just urge her to not quit, maybe just try to gather support within the Democratic Alliance and then trying to run again, because you never know.
Sanet, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's political analyst Sanet Madonsela.